So, welcome to this edition of our podcast, Real Estate Ripoffs, Holding Big Business Accountable. In today's edition, we're going to analyze Chase, JP Morgan Chase, Chase Manhattan, Chase Lending, Chase Bank, all the conglomerations that are really one of the most, I think, obnoxious companies in the history of America, I think, from its very founding. And a lot of people don't understand that because they have this fantastic kind of glowing logo and glowing image to their brand. Let's talk about, more importantly than the history of it, how it affects us today and why they're hurting our economy and hurting consumers and not doing their job. So when they were first founded, it was the Manhattan Company, the Bank of Manhattan, founded in New York by, of all people, Aaron Burr. And those of you familiar with the story of Alexander Hamilton may recognize Burr as our third vice president, but Alexander Hamilton's rival, who they ended up in a duel, and Aaron Burr ended up killing Alexander Hamilton. And as a student of history, you would probably discover that the whole situation was really kind of egged on by Burr. He kind of took advantage, I think, of Alexander Hamilton's insecurities and used that as an excuse rather than to use the duel as an honor, to use a duel to kill his rival, and in a lot of ways is worthy of disrespect. So that's the founding of the company. That doesn't really matter much to us today. We don't do business or not do business with companies based on how they're founded, over 200 years ago. They were founded like in 1799. But today, Chase is the largest bank in America, over 3.39 trillion assets, I guess, about 50% bigger than number two, Bank of America, another company worthy of disrespect, and Wells Fargo. But one of the things that strikes me is that when I started in business, and you read the history, large banks were instrumental in supporting the growth of local economies, the state economy, and the national economy. And really today, these companies are bigger than any country in some regard, or I should say bigger than many countries. And as a result, they have their own agendas. They have nothing to do with what's good for America, what's good for its citizens, or even their own customers. Now, traditionally, the larger banks were the largest lenders of home loans. They were committed to helping homeowners buy houses. And we talk a lot about in the real estate news about the housing affordability crisis. One of the reasons behind that is lending has become kind of like doing business with a post office, that it's so government controlled. But it's also because these large banks have helped lobby the government to create that. It's interesting when you look at the largest mortgage lenders in America, you don't find at the top of the list the largest banks. So you do find them on the list. Number one, Rocket Mortgage, by far. Number two, United Wholesale Mortgage. Number three, Loan Depot. These three companies, the top three, aren't banks. They're mortgage lenders specifically. Number four is Wells Fargo. Number five, Fairway Independent. Again, not a bank. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 are all banks. Whereas traditionally, the largest lenders were banks. The reason why these other companies are even in the market, think about it. People put their deposits in the bank. They walk in the branch. The branch has mortgage lenders right there. And for the most part, the most competitive companies, people choose not to do with the bank, but with other companies. Why is that? And the other thing about these lenders, the banks often are wholesale lenders, meaning they buy loans from other third-party providers. They don't originate the loans, but most of the loans they're doing are through third parties. They're just purchasing. They're just taking the profit, leaving the hard work to the mortgage originators and the mortgage companies instead. Well, why do the banks do that? Well, part of it is because we allow them to use their advantage in tax advantage basis. We allow them to use the full faith and credit of the United States government, which means taxpayer full faith and credit. We allow them to take deposits at 0% and lend them out, multiply them with tax dollars, and then lend them out and make a profit. And they end up, because they're so big, having competitive advantages that other banks can't handle. And when those banks have to earn money by working hard, they pick up the piece of those that fall apart. So for example, one of the common businesses of these large banks like Chase, instead of making more home loans, they just buy them from other companies who are doing the hard work of serving customers. Here's a case where Rocket Mortgage is selling $20 billion of mortgage servicing, which means Rocket did the loan, put it on the books, and instead of continuing to collect the payment, they sell the rights to do that to Chase and other companies, in this case Chase, who make a profit and have the customer's relationship from that time going forward. So it shows you the hard work is origination. The easy work is using taxpayer money to create assets and then using those assets to buy them from companies who are actually in the marketplace doing the hard work with consumers that Chase increasingly steps away from. So that's why even most of the loans done by these companies aren't even done by them. They're done by third parties. Now, these companies, Chase in particular, have been created by buying other failed companies and getting taxpayer concessions as they organize them together. Chase specifically has bought Washington Mutual, Bank One, several other banks when they fail, and then they get concessions from the government and pick them up. Here's an example of one that ended up good for Chase, bad for America, when they bought Bank One, which is actually where Jamie Dimon, the CEO, comes from. So what happens is they buy this bank that's based in Ohio, and they go, well, we're not going to lay off everybody. But what they do over time is start laying everybody off. They're laying off, cutting the mortgage jobs in Columbus as the bank is mostly expanding. Now, most honorable businesses, when they're expanding, do their best to keep employees. They retrain them, they relocate them, they move them to other businesses. Not Chase. No, they bought Bank One. They're going to slash and burn people in Ohio, and they're going to hire more people in New York because whatever reason, it just is easier for them. There's no concept of, hey, you got a concession from the U.S. government to buy this bank and take over these assets, and the assets you use every day. So here you go. And they are the largest private player in Columbus. And they're cutting jobs because, it's a little slow in the mortgages in Ohio, and it's easy for them to replace them somewhere else. So this is kind of the MO of these large banks, Chase in particular. They buy failed assets using taxpayer dollars, taxpayer guarantees, and then they, without regard to the human capital, lay people off, cut them off, and then compete with mortgage companies by buying the mortgage servicing rights rather than doing the actual work. Now, if you notice, whenever you have a picture of the CEO of Chase, always he's looking happy, he's looking tan. Here's the picture, the laying off people. There he is, smiling, dressed nicely. Here's one of him at a conference saying that lower income people need more help, and that he'd pay for it by taxing the wealthy a little bit more. This is a common political nonsense argument made by wealthy people. Oh yeah, we should pay more as wealthy people. When you fill out your U.S. federal income taxes, which we're getting ready to do here, there's an option. You can write a check for more money. There is nothing stopping Jamie Dimon, who makes, I think, $30 million a year salary. Now, one thing about these bankers is there's always incentives and stock bonuses, and you only find out when they're fired for malfeasance that their pay is like 3 or 4 times their actual salary. But he makes $30 million a year. There's nothing wrong with Jamie Dimon saying, you know what, I'm going to donate an extra $3 million in taxes and challenge other wealthy people to do that. He would never do that. It's much easier for him, and Fortune magazine, who covers this nonsense, it's much easier for them to say, oh yeah, we should be paying more taxes on the wealthy. Because what it does is it gives political cover to politicians to raise taxes on everybody. And they lie and they say they're taxing the wealthy when in fact the taxes really hit the middle class more. So whenever you see a person like Jamie Dimon saying the wealthy should pay more, and they're not writing a check, they're just despicable political hacks. And that's what Jamie Dimon does. And he has to, because their business is not earning relationships with customers one at a time. It's using politicians to give him special deals for the bank to make money while the rest of us as taxpayers subsidize him. Here's another example. So he's not a stupid guy. He is quoted here in an article in the San Francisco Business Journal that JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon says that commercial real estate woes could get worse for banks. And what he's pointing out is that banks, and here's a picture of him working hard, working for you. What he's saying here is that the commercial market in particular is struggling. Now, JP Morgan Chase, in years past, big banks lent money to small and medium-sized local businesses. They don't do that anymore. What they do is they lend money, they basically buy assets on the cheap. They're kind of like the bottom feeders in the financial markets. They let the other banks work hard, make the loans, and when they make mistakes or the market turns, or in this case, when Chase pressures the feds to lower rates artificially for years and they go up and banks go bankrupt, Chase swoops in and buys these assets on the cheap and with government guarantees. And so here he's saying, wow, it's too bad these banks are going to have a tough time. When in reality, he's licking his lips, getting ready to buy them. And how do we know that? Because here's another article from the Daily Huddle, which is a great blog on banking. JP Morgan and their other fellow vultures are drafting a landmark lawsuit against the Federal Reserve. Why? They want to have less money held in reserve, meaning they want to be less safe and more dependent on taxpayer guarantees. They want to have more money. Really, it's kind of going to the casino. They want a bigger credit line from the casino being the U.S. taxpayer, so they can buy more assets on the cheap and make more profits. Because when they make more profits, they get bigger salaries. Of course, when they go broke, they just change jobs and magically they end up somewhere else. So here's on one hand, Jamie Dimon saying, the banks are really in trouble and we should be worried about banks. On the other hand, they're saying, but we want to have less reserve. We want to be less safe. We want to put the American people at a bigger risk. So Jamie Dimon, and we, Chase Bank, can make more money as these companies start falling apart, because that's really the business that they're really in. So just despicable example. Now, you might say, well, I know that Chase advertises they do mortgages, and they do. They talk about it a lot. Here's an example. Chase Home Lending increases home buyer grant to $7,500. And so in 8,500 of the 15,000 communities within its program, they're raising a grant for people that can get in with very low down payment. Now, of course, there's two smiling people carrying their boxes. They're so happy moving into their new home. And what you find out when you read this is the grant that's only for Black, Hispanic, Latino community areas. So basically discriminating against whites like me, discriminating against Asian people, discriminating, really, I think this is just appealing to race baiters. Now, you might say, hey, Bill, we need these programs. It's not race baiting. We need special programs for minorities. But here's the thing you should be concerned about. Chase Bank is making these loans to people who are not qualified to buy a house otherwise. They've tried so hard to give out these crumbs to these communities, these poor communities, that not enough people can get them. And so what they're doing is they're eliminating the income requirement. You have to qualify now. Well, think about that. Sounds great, And so what's true is one of two people are getting this loan. Either one, people who don't pay their share of taxes, they don't qualify to buy a house, but they can afford it because they're living in an all-cash environment, or they're criminal and they don't report their crime. So they're going to qualify because they're people of color in these communities who can't qualify for a home loan. So again, people who are going to be working on cash only or not paying taxes, or there'll be hardworking people who just don't qualify because they don't make enough money. And now they're going to give them a grant, get them in a house they can't afford by any standard, by any reasonable standard. And what happened the last time we did that in 2007 and 8? Well, people got in a house they couldn't afford and they lost the house, their lives were destroyed. And so I don't know there's any evidence that these programs help wealth or income, even in minority communities. What's clear to me is it helps Chase look good. It helps Chase with politicians. And again, remember, Chase's business these days is not lending to the average American homeowner or the average American home buyer. Their business is appealing to the American politician, where the power is, so they can use tax dollars to buy properties and to buy banks on the cheap, not individual home loans. So there we have a banking business where people cannot qualify to buy a home loan, but they're going to give some out. And because Chase has $32 trillion, they can offer bonuses of $7,500 one at a time to people because it makes them look good, because it helps them get their next $3 trillion worth of assets under control. Well, what do you think? Is Chase a great company? Do you bank with them? Do they give you great service? I know down the street on Pico Boulevard, the bank's branch is closing. So we have less branches in the area. Do you get your home loan through them? Do they do a job? Do you know somebody at Chase that does a good job of giving you service? Of course, they take your money. All banks are good at the taking, but the idea of using taxpayer guarantees is the money supposed to recycle into the industry and build jobs and build economy. Do you have an experience borrowing money for them. I don't. I haven't seen it myself, and I haven't seen it with any of my customers. They're always getting their loans from small banks and medium-sized banks that Chase uses their size unfairly to put out of business. So what do you see? You have a different opinion? Put it in the comments below or text or email me. As always, I'm on social media at Bill Gross Probate, and make today your best day ever. Thanks so much.